O'clock panel, Transgender Today. My name is Michael Kelker from the Department of English. I'm the event organizer. And there will be ample time, as there is for every session, for questions and comments. Thank you very much for being here, and I'm looking forward to this panel just like you are too.
For those in my class, there's a sign-up sheet over there. Make sure that you sign it up. Your name, yes? You're just staring at me. Okay. You did not sign in. Crowd already. Do it on your way out. Yes. Let me see if I can get some. Michael, do we have water anywhere?
You know what? I didn't think that far ahead. I'm sorry.
I can show you where the water fountain is.
Sure, that'll work just fine.
Okay. Water fountain.
How things been otherwise? Good summer?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Just trotting along. I mean, our big thing for us, we had grandchildren in our house for 18 months, 5 days a week, 11 hours a day. So, I figured out my husband would like $3,800 hours of childcare in the last year and a half.
Oh my gosh.
And then I got $2,500. I mean,
It's unbelievable. And they talk about why it's hard to find workers.
that is do without that. No. Yeah. And then I take care of all the grants. Other side of grandparents do the same thing with another son's children. So, I mean, it's crazy. So, anyway.
So is that ended now? They're back in school? Okay.
Go. I mean, we're just exhausted.
Yeah. I babysat one child a week ago, and I'm still like...
Michael, are we good to go? Can you all hear me? Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today. We have put together a pretty diverse, fabulous panel of experts here today to talk about a really important issue. So I'm out of breath from running up and down the hall, gathering things and people. Whew, okay, I'll get it together. So we have some people here today. I thought we would start out just with a nice introduction, letting you know who these people are and why they're here today. We have some topics to discuss today, and I really hope that at the end we can open it up so that we can have a nice conversation and everyone feels comfortable asking questions or sharing information. So please, I hope that you do take advantage of that. We have some people here today. I'm going to start with Oliver Spencer. And you all correct me if I'm wrong. Oliver is a self-advocate, and Oliver was a student here at St. Charles Community College, and we are so grateful that you are here today. I think it's going to lend a little authenticity, get some insight and perspective that will be really valuable. So we appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. We have Representative Barbara Pfeiffer, St. Louis County District 90, Missouri House of Representatives. Also, are you still a United? Help me out with this.
I am a retired pastor, but if you are a pastor in the United Methodist tradition, you're always an ordained minister. So I still am, but I don't have a church. How about that?
Oh, okay.
I do weddings, so there you go.
Okay. And you also have a little personal perspective with a transgender grandchild.
Yes.
We have Sarah Baker, formerly with Missouri ACLU, now Deputy Chief of Staff at the new mayor's office. Yes? Is that news?
No. Doug knew.
Doug knew. And then I can't see who's sitting next. I'm guessing it's Doug. Mm-hmm. Doug, representative from District 72 with the Missouri House of Representatives, uncle of a gender non-binary individual. And then we have Danielle Meert. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly.
Yeah.
Parent of transgender youth and an activist with Transparent STL. everyone here has volunteered their time, driven out here. Perhaps at least one has gotten lost on the way here. So we are so incredibly grateful for them taking their time to come out and speak with us. I thought I would start out with keeping some things simple. Let's start by laying some groundwork, if you don't mind. And anyone, please chime in, and answer some of these questions. What does the term transgender mean?
I should probably jump in this first because I am transgender, but don't feel afraid. It's okay if you want to talk to your experience about being related to somebody trans or knowing somebody trans. It's very important to understand. Being transgender, it really just means that you identify with a gender that is not the gender you were assigned at birth. So for example, I am a trans man, so that means I was assigned female at birth, and I am transitioning to a man. I always was a man at heart, I just haven't always been recognized as a man.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No,
Add to that definition. Before we get into nitty-gritty details of bills that we wanted to discuss, or legislation or issues, I was hoping, now that we have identified a definition, could we talk about what is some misinformation that exists in regard to the definition?
Where do we start?
Well, we can talk about, I think one of the biggest purveyors of misinformation when it comes to transgender people in Missouri is the Missouri legislature. No offense to the two representatives sitting to the side of me. But there are a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be trans. There's similar to earlier debates that I think people had about individuals who were gay. There's this idea that you'll grow out of it. That's a very hurtful thing that we hear heard in the legislature again and again. There's an idea of, people, particularly you're going to see this in the trans sports bans that we see at the Missouri State Legislature and in 30-plus legislatures around the country. There's this idea that being trans is done for competitive advantage. Nope. And there are a litany of other very painful and hurtful myths that the Missouri legislature and others around the country have really grabbed onto for political advantage, to create fear and division rather than center on what brings us together, which is that every human has dignity and every human has the right to exist in this world together on an equal basis. And so those are some of the ones that I've heard said in the experience at the legislature. Curious if others would add.
Just quickly, there's some staunch conservative viewpoints within the legislature, including this fear of things different and painting it towards violence. And so trans folks get labeled as perverts that are going to rape your daughter in the bathroom. And that's so far from accurate, but it's what I hear people screaming all the time. I don't want my daughter in the bathroom with one of those folks. And I have to say that that's really not an issue that we should be looking at through those eyes. What we need to do is find out how people can access their rights and comfort as American citizens comfortably and equally amongst their peers.
I'm going to chime in.
I'm going to chime in with a little bit of my theological hat as well as my political hat. As I said, I'm a retired United Methodist pastor, and people are complex, and we have lots of very deep-seated norms that we assume are correct. And certainly Missouri is a state that is more conservative than some areas of the country, and that also affects one's view of God and who we are as human beings. And so for many people in the legislature, I do believe that talking about something as highly sensitive as sexuality, and of course this is gender, this is not sexuality, but that three-letter word sex is a huge red flag for many, many people. And we see that in we could do several panel discussions, actually, on how that plays out in our House of Representatives and Senate. But the idea that gender identification is not absolutely set in stone is something that a lot of people have a hard time with. So you have people who have very rigid ideas from a religious point of view, who also don't know much about, frankly, about human biology. And, you know, I hear all the time, either you're XX or you're XY. Well, if you take Biology 101, you're going to discover that's not actually true. And secondly, the diversity within the human species in terms of how we function using those chromosomes is almost infinite. And I would say all of that's normal, because that's the way we are. So, anyway.
Yeah, and as a parent of a transgender kiddo, you know, it's really hard to go hear politicians with their misconceptions and say terrible things about the kiddo you love most. And we've been accused of coercing our children into being transgender. Like any parent was like, you know what you should do? You should try being transgender because you get all the tax breaks and the good parking spots. That is not true. No parent has ever convinced their child to be transgender. We're just affirming who they are and helping them be the best version of themselves, like you would with any child. So no parent has ever coerced their child into being transgender. And then also they don't understand gender dysphoria and how some kiddos really struggle with their body. They don't identify with the body that they were born into. And we have certain politicians, I don't know if I can name them, that think that transgender girls are going to go into a locker room and show their genitals to their teammates, like after a game, like after your 6th grade or 7th grade volleyball game, you're gonna like go shower with your teammates, which nobody does. You shower at home. I mean, I didn't shower until I was in college. I mean, I showered, but like after a sports, I showered every day, but like as an athlete. I'm sorry, let me back up. So I played competitive sports, and the first time I ever showered with my teammates was in college, and I like showed up to a game out of town, and my teammates were like, where's your shower stuff? And I was like, what? Like, I didn't know. But Doug Ritchie thinks that transgender girls who have gender dysphoria are going to walk around naked in a locker room and expose their genitals. No, they won't. It's just mind-blowing, and they won't even talk to us. Like, we go in to testify, or we go to have a lobby day, and I testified the first time was a Don't Say Gay bill last year. And the bill sponsor, they leave the room. They don't even stay to listen. And it's the head of, that's Chuck Basie. He's the head of the Education Committee. And when the head of the House Education Committee has zero desire to learn, it really feels like a battle that we just can't win. And it feels exhausting. And I know it's a marathon, and we're going to be here. And I really appreciate everyone coming here to listen and try to help educate yourselves and other people, because there's so much misinformation out there, and it feels terrifying. Like, is my kiddo going to be safe in the state of Missouri? But it's not even in Missouri. There's 33 states that have these bills, and guaranteed the bill sponsors have never once talked to a transgender person or their family and really listened. And so thank you for being here and listening.
Thank you very much. I think this is a great lead-in. When I was trying to compile a list of some of the specific pieces of legislation that I thought this panel could address, I stopped counting how many addressed the issue of athletics in schools. I started writing them down, and there was literally so many bills that had been introduced, pieces of legislation that had a related amendment. Since we've already hit on that, could we elaborate? And I did write down the legislators who proposed these, not sitting up here. So could we address some of these specific pieces of legislation and where they're at, and some of the issues around them, and some advocacy work that has been done?
I'd be happy to jump in.
Great.
We had a piece of legislation that was brought up in the House of Representatives. It disappeared. It's coming back. It will be filed, and I am sure we're going to be dealing with it because 2022 is an election year. And so, you know, this is the way of politics. Anything that is going to gin up the base is something that is going to be looked at. And I expect a really ugly fight over the athletic bills for about banning kids who are transgender. There are a couple of things that I think are really important to point out. Now, this would pertain to schools that participate in athletics through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And if you look at the purpose statement for any kind of extracurricular activity for a child who's going through school in the state of Missouri, nowhere does it say that winning in an athletic contest is part of the purpose. The purpose is to develop social skills, to develop emotional skills. The purpose is to develop participation in democracy, amazingly enough. There are a whole bunch of really good things that our athletic competitions are supposed to promote, not that they always do, but nowhere is winning a game or a race a part of the purpose of why kids participate in sports in the state of Missouri. So it seems to me that this whole thing about, and really this is very much centered on young women who are transgender. This whole thing about winning is a complete red herring. They don't care about winning. That's not what this is about. But a lot of people in Missouri do care about winning and don't understand that the purpose of extracurricular activities is actually not winning. So, you know, I've been to lots of Friday night football games. Y'all have too. We like to win, but that's not the purpose for you all to have participated in sports in the state of Missouri. And I think that's important to remember. Second thing is, we already have regulations about kids participating in sports who are taking hormone treatment. So they have to have been doing that for a year. It's a system that is already up and running, and there have been zero complaints about that. And then the House of Representatives thought they were going to have a heart attack when they found out that that was the case. So anyway, I'll stop now and let somebody else speak.
There are a few other categories of bills that I think you should be aware of. So on the athlete bills, there are two tracks for that. One is just a House bill or a Senate bill, an SB or an HB. Those would change the law, but they don't go to a vote of the people. The other tactic that they've taken with the athlete bills, and this is particularly relevant to the representative's point about the elections, is to make it an HJR or an SJR so that it would be up for a vote of the people. And what that really will do is gin up rhetoric against trans people in Missouri. That's very dangerous. Whenever we other, whenever we marginalize, we're putting people directly at risk, not only for their own sense of self-worth, but in the actions that community members will take against them. And Missouri is in no way immune from those type of actions. I remember right when I started with the ACLU, 2017, I was at a conference in New York about transgender rights across the country, and that was the day that I heard about Allie's murder. Allie was a girl who was in Texas County, I believe, which is exactly the county where the representative who then filed this HJR against trans athlete was from, and she was brutally murdered. Those are the kind of things that happen when you other. So those are the athlete bills. Then you've also got these medical ban bills, which I'm going to let Danielle speak to most, because I think this gets at the heart of parenting and making decisions with your kid and with your doctor. But essentially what that effort does is try to criminalize parents for taking care of their kids. And then there are also the Don't Say Gay bills. Those bills try to take out education about LGBT people from Missouri classrooms. even banning things, the whole reason for that bill to exist is that there was a poster that someone didn't like that was gender affirming in a Columbia school district. They want to remove that type of education. Well, if we don't learn about the histories of our people, then we don't appreciate the contributions that they've made to society, and we devalue their personhood. And so those are some of the groups of bills, and there's also a subset that attacks foster kids. There are more education bills that more broadly go after LGBT kids, but those are some of the things we have had to be on the lookout for about 5 years in the Missouri legislature. We also don't have the protections we should, and those are the kinds of bills that we're going to be fighting again in this next legislative session.
Yes, regarding the sports bans, it's really heartbreaking because, as Barb mentioned, the whole purpose of youth sports is participation and building friendships and being a part of a team. And can't even allow transgender kiddos to be on our sports teams with regular cisgender kiddos. When are you going to let them be a part of the society? Are you just going to let them you hire them for a job and like be a normal neighbor to them? No, you're othering these kiddos from the time they are first coming out, and it's really devastating to know that my child might not ever be accepted in society, even though he's the greatest kid. Anyone who's met him knows he's wonderful, and that he did not coerce him to be transgender. But yeah, one of the bills, we would go to prison for 15 years for felony child abuse and neglect. The same thing if I were to rape my child or beat my child. Just getting gender affirming health care, like a hormone blocker or gender affirming hormones, that would be considered felony child abuse, and I would go to jail. And my husband would go to jail, and then anyone who supported him would go to jail. Our doctors would have their licenses taken away. Our doctors who have already taken an oath to not harm any child, they would have their license taken away and they would go to jail. And they're trying to take away all the supports that we can give our children, and then these kids feel abandoned and helpless. And then we know the alternatives when you don't have support. We know the rates of suicide and all that, and it's terrifying. And all we want is our kiddos to play on a sports team. They're not doing anything weird in the locker rooms. We just want them to have regular health care and be represented in the curriculum as well. In my school district, my kiddo's school district, since school started this year, one of the teachers was forced to take down a poster that just had, it was Black Lives Matter, it was Black Lives Matter, trans, LGBTQ. This is a safe classroom. You can come in here. If your parents aren't accepting, you can come to this classroom and talk to this teacher. And the teacher had to take that sign down. And that's how HJR 65, or not, what was it? HB 1565. That was the very first bill I testified in opposition to, was the Don't Say Gay bill. And it was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Having to sit there and ask, can my kiddo just be represented in the curriculum? Can you just not deny that he and other people like him exist? They were making it so if someone were to discuss Harvey Milk, if someone were to say, Harvey Milk was the first openly gay elected official and he was murdered by another elected official. If you were to bring that up in a classroom, a parent could sue the school district for mentioning that there was a gay politician. You could sue over that. That's bananas. That's absolutely bananas. These kids exist. Oliver exists. Miles exists. Nibbling exists. And we need to do more education. We need to have more events like this, in particular for education. When you have puberty talks in 5th grade, they always separate the boys and the girls, and it's very mysterious. I think we should just do everything together in one classroom, because you know what? If say 99%, it's too many. Say 99% of kids are heterosexual and they're going to be partnered for life with another person of the opposite gender. Shouldn't you know about that body? Shouldn't you know how to be able to go and buy a box of tampons for your wife or your girlfriend? We have a state legislator right now who cannot say tampon. He could not say tampon on the floor. He's called it the T word. He couldn't say the T word. You should not be writing laws about my body if you can't say tampon? So, kiddos like Miles, when puberty started, that's when things got really heavy and really depressing, and we didn't know what was happening. And my kiddo was a therapist in elementary school, and we had no idea. And he tried to come out to me before his second birthday. He was like 22 months old when he first said, "I don't feel like a girl." And I, being a tomboy, thought, oh, he's a tomboy, just like me. And that was the explanation, and that's what we went with. And that was wrong. I was wrong. And had I known, had I had the education, had I had a puberty education years ago that addressed this, I could have known and helped my kiddo. And instead we put it off and we delayed it because I just didn't know any better. And since we've received gender affirming health care, he's made honor roll. He was in the New York Times last month, or back in June, and he's speaking for himself, and he's standing up for other kids, and I'm so thankful Oliver is too here today. And so anything you can do to help spread this information, we so appreciate it, because it's just devastating. It's overwhelming. We are outnumbered 3-1 in Jefferson City. And we have people like Doug Ritchie and Chuck Basie and Susie Pollack who are accusing us of all these horrible things, and they've never even talked to us. So thanks for listening.
Danielle,
they would have left.
I wanted to expand a little bit upon something that you addressed about schools being forced to take down posters or not being allowed to discuss facts in history class. Recently there was, and I know you and I talked about this just a few minutes ago, there was a display at our Capitol in Jefferson City, and it was taken down. And I don't know if anyone here would like to give some information about that or talk about it. I brought several news articles if we wanted details. It says on August 27th, the museum opened a display that had an exhibit that was supposed to go through 2021, the rest of the year. It was a history of LGBTQ rights and activism in Kansas City. The display was developed by University of Missouri, Kansas City, and it was called Making History, Kansas City and the Rise of Gay Rights. And within a couple of days, it started some controversy at the Capitol. Would any of you like to address that? So it was taken down. It was taken down. There are several representatives, Representative Ann Kelly, some other representatives who were tweeting about it and were upset by it, and the Parson administration decided to remove this exhibit.
The display was up for 2 days. My coworkers, a handful of them, started lobbying the governor very publicly on social media that this was blasphemous, it was against God, it was a wrong thing to have in our state capitol. And the governor caved and pulled the display down. And when he was asked about, what are you doing pulling this display down in an area where we have free speech, in an area where we celebrate the history of our state and the people of our state, he said, well, it wasn't reviewed by the governor's committee. Now, in statute, there's a thing called the governor's committee. And what that committee does is it allocates space in the Capitol to the Department of Natural Resources for a museum. And basically what they do is they say, these hallways from this point to this point, you can put displays in. They have no oversight over any display which goes in. They simply allocate space in the Capitol, and they've not changed that space in something like 65 years. They've made no changes to the space that the museum occupies. So the governor just up and lied, basically, looking for a reason as to why he removed this. And a lot of us are a little livid about that, especially those of us that are patriots that believe in free and open speech. That's all I really want to say about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that absolutely none of the other displays in the museum in the Capitol have gone, quote, through the governor's committee. So it was totally fictitious. And
demand they all be removed.
That's
yeah, it's totally false. So yeah.
Yes.
Well, yes, I would agree. Yes, and frankly, I think it needs to go to court. talk to the people we know in ACLU.
Yeah, I don't work for the ACLU anymore. But whenever instances happen like that, that's a role for organizations like the ACLU and other free speech advocates to lean in and say, right, left, center, no matter where you are, we get to talk about it, right? Because we think that the best cure or we, the ACLU, would have the representation that the best way to confront speech that someone might find objectionable is more speech, right? It's having dialogues like this. It's making sure that we're not silencing one side or the other, and we're not erasing people from history, but instead we're having a conversation about the ills of our society, the goods of our society, and we're not saying these things are off limits, right? We have to stretch our minds and find a way to have inclusive conversation, and that's really at the core of it. So I can't speak for my former organization and what they would do, but I can say, just looking at the issue from the outside, that's an example of the government saying no to a particular type of speech, and that's concerning.
Very concerning. And when one thinks about equal protection under the law, this clearly, to me, non-lawyer that I am, violates that really sacred principle in our Constitution of equal protection.
Thank you very much for addressing that. I appreciate it. If there's any other pieces of legislation specifically that you want to address, I have literally like 4 pages here. Yes, please.
I want to dovetail with what Danielle said about the proposed legislation that would criminalize parents who, after exhaustive consultation with medical experts and a minor child, decide that the child has the right to begin hormone therapy. This is a really big issue for many reasons, both emotional and physical. I have a grandchild who is trans, and we're in the process of, his parents, my daughter, they're in the process of discerning all of this right now. And this is a child that, since the age of 2, very much like Miles, has said, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy. I mean, that's some of the first things this child ever told me when he was tiny. And he's part of the University of Washington longitudinal study of kids who are trans. So he's in good hands. But I think about my role as a grandparent. This is a child who comes to visit. So let's say I was going to have my grandchild with me for a month. What would happen? Would we be able to do the hormone therapy that this child needs? Does this mean that my grandchild can no longer come to Missouri? Do I have to, I don't know, drive over to Illinois to a state park somewhere and park in a parking lot so that we can do a daily hormone treatment? I mean, think about this, folks. Let's say I have a family member who is driving through Missouri, right? And they started in Washington, D.C., they're ending up in San Francisco, and they would like to spend the night in Missouri. Do we put signs up on the interstate and say, this is a sundown state? Do any of you know what a sundown state is? Some of you may not. They were states and cities where if the sun goes down and you are a minority, you better not be in this town because you'll be killed. That's basically what that's all about, sunset or sundown. So, are we going to put up signs letting people know they cannot handle being in Missouri? We don't want you. You can't be on I-70 at midnight because you can go to jail for 15 years. There are huge repercussions when we start down this line. We're talking about a totalitarian state, ultimately, when you start thinking about what these kinds of laws mean. This is very serious. And I'm going to tell you, it affects every single one of us here. It's far more important to all of us than we may realize. And then one other thing I wanted to say was to dovetail back to what Sarah said about having a statewide vote probably very few of you were aware in 2004 that the state of Missouri did exactly this. And what we did was we outlawed, by constitution, single-sex marriage. I don't know if y'all are aware of that. And I want to say that very proudly, I was one of, get this, the 17% of the people in the state of Missouri who voted against that. Which means in 2004, 83% of the voters on that day in the state of Missouri voted to make single-sex marriage illegal. Same sex, yeah, well. That's probably what the margin would be today. And yet, now that we have, same-sex marriage, nobody thinks about it, do they? It's not a big deal. Who cares? It's a joy. But people are very fearful of what they don't know or understand.
And actually, I'm just going to do a quick poll. Could you raise your hand if you have somebody trans in your life? Wow. Okay, so I'm kind of going to be preaching to the choir here a little bit, but I want you to hear my words. We're talking about legislation affecting the trans community. We're talking about legislation affecting American civil rights is what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And I got to tell you, first off, let's address the athletic bills. There are 2 kids right now that fall under the regulations which currently exist to address trans kids in athletics. 2.
In the state of Missouri.
In the entire state. So you're having your state legislature, your state senate, your governor, all this money spent on misinformation, disinformation, processing laws, taking votes for 2 kids. Because it's something they can grasp onto, make people feel something. You know, we need to step back from our emotions sometimes. So I'm going to talk about, and I want you to pick up after this, I'm going to talk about my experience a little bit. So I'm an uncle to a gender non-binary individual. They use the pronoun they. Born female, and had 2 years ago a partial transition surgery. And this is a little baby I held, newborn, a day old. And I watched them grow up, and I watched them suffer emotionally. Without a real clue or a real understanding, I'm from a working class Catholic family. So of course I support trans rights. I support everybody's rights. But getting to know somebody, having a family member who's going through this process is an education. So they went through this partial transition surgery 2 years ago, and the relief, the emotional grounding, the comfort in their own body for the first time in their life was something that was amazing to see, and it's something that unless you knew and loved somebody, you wouldn't pay attention to. But it's worth saying that because we're talking about parents who love their children more than anyone can love anyone on the planet, is a parent's love for a child. And they go through a great deal of counseling. They go through a great deal of research. They go through a great deal of consultations with physicians to make a decision about what goes on in the health and well-being of their child's life. It's not handled easily. It's not dramatic. It's not, oh, well, we're just going to take care of this for you and convert them. That's not the way this works. And it's an immensely personal decision. And I have to wonder, why is the state inserting itself in somebody's doctor's office once again? So I want to caution you as American citizens. I want you to think about what government's responsibilities are and why we're driven to take these bold actions in law and statute which are not the government's place. And think about how we counter that, in a conversation with somebody with, well, I don't want one of these kids in a dress in the bathroom with my daughter. How are you going to address that in a conversation? How are you going to talk somebody down into being a patriotic American citizen of tolerance once again? because that's the direction we need to go. And I think that's all I need to say, and I want you to.
What am I talking? Which one? Oh my gosh, I have so many things I could say. Oh gosh, let me collect my thoughts for a second. Can we come back to me?
You know what,
'Cause-
actually, Oliver I believe,
Okay.
wanted to say something.
Sorry, I didn't want to butt in too much. It's like, I think what you're all saying is very important. I think I want to bring up, there is also a bill pending for Missouri right now, where they would allow a court to decide on a transgender youth whether or not they can actually transition. So if like that kid is like in the state's custody, the state gets to decide, the court gets to decide. And as lucky as I am to be in a family who accepts me, and as lucky as everybody who's related to you is lucky to have a family who accepts them, unfortunately, there are far, far more trans kids out there who don't have accepting families, who don't have anywhere else to go. They have to either live with the state or live on their own in the streets. Imagine standing before a judge telling you, no, you're not allowed to be who you are. No, you're not allowed to even see a doctor about this. How dare you try and be who you are for 1 second of your life even. We're going to deny you just because we are afraid. Imagine being that kid. It is absolutely horrifying to me to think that there's even up for grabs for our state, for our country even. I'm sorry I'm getting emotional about this, but I feel it's so strongly that it's, there's so many things right now that are getting, either addressed left and right or passed left and right. Not only in Missouri, but in other states as well, where it's based in fear and bigotry against people who are just trying to live their lives as themselves. And it's absolutely terrifying when you're trans to see other trans people getting othered too, and to think to yourself, do I need to move? Do I need to do something differently with my life? What do I need to do to protect myself? I thought about living outside of the United States just because there's so much fear of me being me. And it's like, I wouldn't hurt a fly. I don't care about what you want to do with your life. Why do you care about what I do with mine? It's, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that somebody somewhere is going to get hurt because they're just trying to be themselves. And it's even more scary when that person looks a lot like you.
I want to dovetail with what Oliver said. One of the things that's very scary for people who love folks who are trans, and also for trans children and youth, is the suicide or attempted suicide rate. And I've seen figures that up to 50% of kids who are trans contemplate suicide at one time or another. However, there's also another finding, and this has come out of the University of Washington longitudinal study that's ongoing. There are other studies as well, and the finding is this, that children and youth who are trans, who are in supportive and loving environment, have basically exactly the same kind of ideation on contemplation of suicide as other kids, that the rates drop enormously now. That said, we have some issues about suicide in the United States. I don't want to pretend that everything is all well and good. However, the kind of support that Oliver was talking about is essential. And this kind of stuff makes a huge difference. And then what you all do in your own lives and how you support people, it's powerful. And that story also needs to be told over and over again because it's also a public health issue and public policy issue. Thank you.
Oh, and I was going to talk a little bit about the healthcare ban as well. There's no other, I don't want to call it a condition, there's no other reason, no other policy where you would deny healthcare to a minor if a child has cancer, diabetes, anything. Actually, I think parents can get in trouble if you have a sick child and you don't take him to the doctor. Like, can't you go to jail, right, for being neglectful? We have the opposite. Like, we're trying to, we have to go to so many specialists, for the sports policy. It's the same as does anyone know about the Olympics and NCAA, what their policies are for transgender kids or athletes? They have to be on their gender-affirming hormones for a year. And you can't just walk into the doctor and be like, I'm transgender, I'm gonna get me some hormones. No, it's a process. It takes a minimum of 6 months, maybe longer, because you have to go through all of the different specialists and they have to write very long letters and everyone has to be in agreement. The parents have to be on board. It's a process. And they're trying to stop us from doing that. And the most infuriating, there's so many infuriating parts, but for this healthcare ban in the House, Representative Susie Pollack is the bill sponsor, and she pre-filed this healthcare ban where I'd go to jail for 15 years for giving healthcare to my child. And on the same day that she filed that bill where I would go to jail for providing healthcare for my child, she also filed HJR 1, which gives parents what's the wording? They have sole exclusive rights in the upbringing of their children. HJR 1 gives parents the exclusive rights in the upbringing of their children for education, religion, and healthcare, except transgender kids. She literally filed those bills on the same day in the same brain. I can see maybe if you were a politician in your younger years and then you went back to being a politician decades later and you're like, oh, I was wrong 20 years ago, I switched my mind. No, same day. She can say, parents have the exclusive right to not vaccinate your children so you can die a preventable death. That's fine. But I cannot provide gender-affirming care for my child. And it's just, you can try to talk to her. I don't know if anyone can find that out why that is, but.
Good luck.
Good luck, okay.
We tried.
I wanted to address something also. When I was working on this panel, we had a request from a staff member at this college, and her request was, please hear, I'm quoting, we need to hear from both sides. We need to hear from those that made this choice but now feel it may have been a life-altering mistake, and then provided 2 links to articles to illustrate what this person meant. One of those links was to a 2018 article from Science-Based Medicine saying gender dysphoria is actually a mental health disorder, and another link to a Catholic website, Human Life International, from 2021 article saying, quote, gender is not fluid, they are hurting and must be given an outlet to heal themselves rather than maiming their own bodies. This individual asked us to please address this. Anyone?
I'd like to first address, and anybody who knows a trans person should know this, not all trans people have gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness where you feel that disconnect between your body and who you are on the inside so severely that you cannot function on a day-to-day basis. It is that crippling for somebody with gender dysphoria, to the point where they can't get up out of the bed, or if they do get up out of bed, maybe they don't feed themselves. It's 10 times the stress of being depressed. And I mean, I don't mean to say that to dishearten anybody who is depressed. If you are struggling with depression, please get help, because it is a difficult thing to deal with. But it's so crushing to see, people who are struggling with gender dysphoria, but not everybody who is trans has gender dysphoria, or if they do have gender dysphoria, maybe they're able to cope with it to the point where they are able to focus day to day, and it's not a mental illness. But even if you're mentally ill, it doesn't mean that you don't deserve treatment. And it's incredibly disheartening to see this choice of transitioning or this need of transitioning as something that you might regret down the line, when in reality, very, very few people who are trans regret transitioning. They feel more comfortable being addressed day to day without having to worry about if people are going to clock them as trans. They don't have to worry about fitting into the clothes that they want to fit in. They don't have to worry about, just their normal daily lives getting interrupted by somebody saying, oh, you're not really whatever you identify as. You're not really trans. You're not really a woman. You're not really a man. You're not really non-binary. But you know how annoying that gets when you work at a grocery store. Of course I know I don't look like that, Karen, but for 2 seconds, can we just pretend to be polite and just say that I'm a man and just move on? Like, you don't remind me. I know I don't look like a dude, but I feel like a man on the inside. And like, you don't get to decide who I am. You don't get to decide that.
Thank you.
I think that's the most important part. You don't get to decide who I am.
Yes.
You don't. When in any other context would we think that that's an appropriate thing for the government to do? I think the best way to learn about trans people is to learn from trans people. So if you don't know someone who's trans, and let me tell you this, you probably do. You just don't know someone who's openly trans to you. And that's okay. But I think it calls us to open our hearts and minds to hear more, to seek out information, to be curious and learn. And one of the places you can actually do this, because our government has been so devastatingly harsh against trans people, there has been joy and passion heard from the other side, heard from parents like Danielle, heard from her child Miles, heard from so many trans kids and parents of trans kids and relatives of trans kids across this entire state. It is a roar. So if you need that information, it exists for you. Go and look at the testimony of people from across this state, of your neighbors, of people who are in community with you who are fighting for trans kids. And then come back to that question that was asked by the faculty member here of, let's make sure to hear the other side. And tell me if there is another side at the end of that. Because really what you're going to hear is this is about the dignity of a person and the autonomy of a person and their ability to be who they are in the world and navigate that way. And you have to talk to the people who are absolutely closest to the issue to have a real understanding of how you should proceed. And if you're not doing that with intentional and deep listening, you certainly shouldn't be legislating about it. And so let's be reflective. Let's make sure that our policies are based on real conversations and real understanding. And let's get to know one another, because we cannot reflect on someone's dignity without that conversation, and we shouldn't.
And another thing with the legislation, they will focus, the bill sponsors will focus, you focus on things that agree with you. So they'll say, oh, there's a really high desistance rate or something. They'll quote some really high rate of people, of transgender humans that detransition. And then they ignore the fact that, I think it's a really high number, 60+% of people that could have potentially detransitioned at one point in time retransition again once they get away from their church or their family that's not supportive. And so, they come out, they're finally living their true lives, and then it's so hard. They can't get a job. They can't get housing. How do you live as an openly transgender person when you are being denied dignity? You're being denied work. You have to live, you have to eat, there's these things you have to do. And sometimes people have to leave, get rid of talks. I have decluttered, I have Marie Kondo'd my life, getting rid of all the people. And, now I'm happier. But when you're around those other people, it brings you down. So there are people that detransition, and there's good reason why. It's like a self-preservation. If you know that you are in danger, you have to get yourself out of that danger. And you will hear about, oh, these people, they were transgender and then they detransitioned. Where are they? Because we had a packed hearing room not now because of COVID, but before COVID, we packed those hearing rooms full of families that support our kids. well, we would have had families here, but they were afraid of being called bigots or something. Well, guess what? You call my child worse names and he's here, and he's 14, you know, he's 7th grade and we're here. So if you have all these people, you know, bring them, testify publicly. We support our family, and it's absolutely infuriating to hear all these, well, maybe, well, I don't know, maybe, say example, my son does detransition. He's not going to. But who's going to hurt from that? Me. Like, I would hurt, my son would hurt, you know, like, the only person that could potentially get hurt is, like, my family if I'm wrong. And I'm not wrong. I was wrong a long time ago. You know, I thought my child was a tomboy, but...
I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions from the audience.
Can I respond to this question?
Yes.
So, you know, I think what we're talking about here is more of a fundamental right of autonomy over our own bodies. You know, frankly, we can talk about how people feel and the science behind our genetics and the science behind our psychology and the confusing and complicated issues of human sexuality all we like. But the truth is, if I want to get a tattoo, I get a tattoo. If I want to change my sex, I change my sex. And my motivations, my drives for doing either of those acts are mine personally, between myself, my creator, my family, my lovers. And frankly, I think that all of these conversations are a distraction when we're talking about basic, fundamental human rights to control one's own body.
Well, I would say amen. I do want to respond to the second link that was referenced from the Catholic Church. St. Thomas Aquinas is the official philosopher of the Catholic Church, and one of the things that he did almost 1,000 years ago was to look at essential attributes and accidental attributes, and gender would be an essential attribute in his reckoning. And my response to that is, you know what? Good old Thomas was fine 1,000 years ago. We do not have to be constrained by the understanding of medieval Europe in terms of knowing who we are. I mean, we would not be sitting here if we actually did that. So he's fine as a historic relic. He is not definitive in terms of who we are today. And then the second thing, I've been thinking about all of you looking out. Most of you are quite young, and many of you will have children in your lives. And one of the themes that certainly among those of us who have family members who are trans is listen to your little ones. Miles was saying who he was at 18 months. My little guy was saying who he was at the age of 2. Over time, listen and respect the kiddos in your lives as they tell you who they are, and be willing to change your mind about who you thought they were as they let you know who they are.
Do we have any questions, comments?
Yes, this is our time for questions and comments. I can run around the room with this microphone. Let's first of all give a hand clap for our guests. This has been an outstanding session. It touches down on some essential human elements and you know, speaking to the event, Democracy Days, some things that are absolutely critical in the functioning of a democracy, such as what is the proper role of government, not to mention these specific bills. Who had a hand raised?
Hi. Okay, so first of all, if I wasn't forced to come here, I wouldn't have come here. I'm going to be honest. So thank you, Ms. Bono, for forcing us to come. Not because I have anything against transgenders or gays or anything, just because I wasn't one to raise my hand to say that I have somebody in my life that's like that. And so I feel for all of you, and I'm glad that I'm getting your perspective, even though I wouldn't have just went out and got it on my own. So thank you. Next, I'm so glad that we have a ex-pastor on stand to show, like, I'm a Christian, and people have asked me before, you know, are you against gays? Do you hate gays? Do you hate transgenders? And I hate that question because as a follower of God, I'm not God. I don't commit judgment on anybody. You know, that is only God's place to do that. And he tells me to love everybody. So as a Christian, I love everybody, right? No matter what. I do have a couple questions though is it Oliver? Okay. So it's a two-part question. What does it mean to be a man or a woman to you? And then, how did you know, what events to know that you were a man now?
That's a wonderful question. I think to me, the terms of man and woman, I think I understand that part of my understanding of gender is severely limited because I can only know what I know is me, and I can't tell anybody else who they are. But for me, being a man is, I am a man. And I think there's parts of that identity that, they could belong to any gender, I like to ride bikes and read books, and I like to be who I am. And I think it's just, for me, it's a more helpful term to say, all right, I also find myself, I get along with guys more. Some women get along with guys more, and that's totally fine. For me, it's just about, it's a more helpful label, I think, for other people to understand, this is just part of who I am, It's as equally relevant as saying, anything else about me. The only real difference is that, for me, being a man also means that sometimes I get people who decide, hey, I'm going to throw a slur at you. And it's kind of funny because it's like, you hear about people saying, oh, well, this experience gets devalued, and it's like, and this experience is not devalued, and it's like, it doesn't matter whether or not it's devalued. What matters is that you value who you are more than anybody else will, because if you're putting so much stock into, hey, I'm going to be really angry at trans people for being trans, you have a lot more energy than you realize. You need to take up a hobby. You need to do something try puzzle making. It's really fun. It's really easy to get into. As for how I knew, I didn't know for a while, because for me, I have autism, which means that I'm smarter than all of you. I'm kidding. But I didn't really understand, hey, a lot of social constructs didn't come naturally to me. To me, it was like holding a door open was as foreign as eating cereal with milk first. No, put the cereal in first. Somebody else will argue with me on that, and that's totally fine. They're wrong, but for me, it's being trans didn't really occur to me because I didn't really know anybody who was trans growing up. I didn't have education about what being trans was like. I didn't have, the only type of sex we were taught in sex ed was, heterosexual sex. We weren't taught anything else. And I was raised Christian, I still believe in Jesus. I think he's a very cool dude, Some people get surprised about that, but it's no, his teachings were pretty much very solid. He was yeah, accept everybody or else. And it was all right, cool, I'm down for that. I'm cool with that. And it's so surprising to me when people don't understand that you can identify with being Christian without necessarily having it contradict supporting other people's right to live. So thank you.
Yes.
And so I think it took me a while to understand I was trans, but when I finally saw it, I was retroactively, I was oh, okay, so that explains a lot. Yeah, all right.
Hi, I'm Samantha, and I am dual enrolling here. I am a senior at Francis Howell, and I have a very small group of friends, and in that group of friends, we have a transgender male and then a gender fluid person, and I'm very close friends with both of them, and we've never been able to talk about the politics of it because I've known them since elementary school, so I've never really questioned it. It's what I grew up with. My family was never crazy religious, so I just got to grow up through experience with all of this. And I've never really gotten into many of the politics with it. I knew about all the laws against transgender people. I knew about so many of the conservative people in the government who don't feel for these people like I do. And it's just crazy to me, and like this was a really good experience for me, even though I have been exposed to a lot of the LGBT community. I've never been able to really get into depth with it with my friends for fear of like offending them by accident or saying something that is really like offensive and stuff like that. So this was a really good experience for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, my question actually was, you were talking earlier in the discussion about how in schools people aren't able to take part in a lot of the competitions and after-school extracurriculars. And I think that it is important because it is an aspect of socialization and it keeps people from doing otherwise harmful activities over time. But my question is, whenever we get up to the higher levels of sports, such as MMA, in recent events, there was a debut transgender fighter who took out someone in their first matchup, and I just didn't know whether or not we could take it up to that level, whether or not something like that would be acceptable or not.
Oh, I think MMA fighting has a high rate of injuries, regardless of whether or not the participants are transgender or not. I know Nick Schroer brings up MMA fighting constantly. Fallon, somebody who broke someone's like orbital bone. Yeah, that happens. Like if you watch boxing or MMA fighting, like people get hurt. I played soccer. I lost my front tooth my senior year of high school. Thank God my senior pictures the weekend before. And that was because a girl shorter and slower than me headed me in the mouth. Injuries happen in sports. Are we just going to start suing other athletes because you get hurt in a softball game or a volleyball game? You're going to have kids that are taller, shorter, slower, faster, and size and speed are not always an advantage. My husband's 6'5", but he can't play basketball to save his life. Like I can take him. I'm only 5'7". It doesn't matter, like size, and it's who you are. Especially with youth sports, like what we're talking about here, like MMA fighting. That's like not what we're talking about. I mean, it's a thing, but we're talking about kids from like kindergarten through 18 that just want to play on a team with their friends. That's it, and they want to be part of that team. And they're not going to do anything weird. They're not intentionally hurting anyone. And I bet you, if you look at the football team, I bet you'll find some kids on that team that are doping, that could hurt someone, and like they're not even looking at those kids. They're not looking at cisgender male athletes. They're only looking at transgender female. This is an attack on black transgender girls. That's it.
I just want to say thank you, first of all. And I had plenty of questions, but I know we're limited for time. So I have two questions specifically, one for Oliver and one for the pastor. The one for Oliver is, for someone like myself as a queer person who's not transgender, what can other queer people do to support the transgender community? And for the pastor, also myself as an ex-Christian who grew up in a very conservative religion, what can we do? And like, for me, it really makes me upset as an ex-Christian who left, seeing the discrimination against transgender and other queer people in the name of religion, especially through places like churches that receive tax breaks, religious schools that receive funding from the government, like my tax dollars. What's something we can do about that, and like, why is that so acceptable, I guess, my question.
So to address your first question, which if you wouldn't mind repeating it one more time, sorry. Sorry.
I was just saying, as queer people, non-transgender queer people, what can we do to support the trans community?
Okay. Sorry, I'm like, my brain like focuses so hard on like one thing at a time, and it'll be like, oh hey, let me listen in on this other question because it might pertain to this first question. And then it is interlinked because unfortunately, for some reason, being trans is political, and it really shouldn't have to be, which is sad. But some of the things you can do, including coming to events like this to learn more, because education is important. talk to trans people that you know. If you know any trans people, talk to them about their experience, like let them know that you're there for them. You know, if you see us at Pride, say hi. And you know, I think it's important to like stay alert of what's happening for trans people, like not only like where you live, but also just globally. It's important to keep updated of what's happening, and like do your best to like fight against anything that is inherently transphobic. You know, if you like see a bill and you're like, oh hey, that shouldn't be passed, do what you can to like go against it. You know, there's petitions, there's plenty of opportunities to talk to wonderful people like this. There's you know, call your senator and bother them if you need to. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, you may only be one person, but if you encourage everybody else around you to do the same thing that you're doing and like listen to trans people and like act on what you can, like, you know, things like this, it makes a world's difference.
Okay, for me, and I'm not sure I got all of the question. First of all, I want to say that the world of faith is highly divergent on all kinds of social issues. And you know, you go across the board. There are millions and millions of people who are Christian, who are Jewish, who are Muslim, who are Hindu, who do not have the kind of conservative viewpoints that are usually highlighted in the media. You just need to know that. There are all kinds of folks like me out there. I was a pastor for 41 years. I served churches. I never got thrown out, even though I had some people leave, because I would preach about folks who are LGBTQIA, about Muslims who have rights in our country and things like that. But there are lots of us, so you just need to know that. Secondly, when you think about what guides you, we all have values. And regardless of whether or not we call them spiritual or not, we have values. And I think fundamentally, we need to decide what are our guiding values. And for me, they're pretty clear. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. For me personally, God is love, and in God there is no darkness. Perfect love casts out fear. That's what I live by. And so, you know, when you start with the fundamentals, everything else flows from there. But if you start from a place of fear, then you begin to cut off relationships. And for those of us who have an understanding of God or a greater power, the question is this a greater power that's mostly punitive or mostly love or all love? And that's where I stand.
And I want to make one really specific plug. When you see these bills that Oliver's talking about, do come testify. Yes. I know that can be really scary and intimidating, and believe us, for all of us, our first times doing that were scary. But taking the podium, sitting down in front of your elected officials and letting them hear from you and relate to you in whatever identities you might hold really does help. And I think as an illustration of a person of faith who did this very well last year, you should look up the testimony of Brandon Boulware. It's Boulware. And he talks about his trans daughter. They live in the Kansas City area, and he rocks the house, for the lack of a better term, right? And you don't all have to speak like Brandon, but when you speak out, that has power. And I think that's a really specific thing everyone in this room can and should do to advocate for trans people.
And let me add, you don't have to actually even be there in person. You can submit written testimony also many times.
You can, but we'd love you to come in person.
And a few more things you can do to be inclusive. Make sure that you are respectful of pronouns, especially for the non-binary folks, they, them. I know people struggle with they, them being singular. It is. For example, when there was the Ukraine whistleblower, no one knew if it was a boy or girl. And all of media was like, they, you know, whatever about Ukraine. It's possible. So they, them, use your pronouns. If there's a GSA, a gay straight alliance, go. You don't have to be trans or gay. You can be an ally, and then you can learn how to, you know, more things you can do to be an ally. And also, one thing I'm pushing for in schools is and libraries is to have age-appropriate literature available from a very young age up to older people, like if you have a grandparent that's confused. So make sure that you're checking out and supporting your local libraries and making sure that there is LGBTQ literature available and support them, because libraries are a safe space.
We're just about out of time. We have a 2:30 panel on Afghanistan that I encourage everyone to attend. I would like to give Martha Campen a moment because speaking to college resources, she has some ideas.
Thank you, Mike. I'll be very quick. I know we're running late. First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself to the students here. I am the Chief Diversity Officer, and I welcome any and everybody to come and visit with me and talk about any questions at all. But more importantly, go to the library. The library is absolutely a safe place. There are all kinds of great books. One of them here, Expanding the Rainbow, is one. The other is She, He, They, Me by Robin Ryle, which I think is an excellent book to just gain further understanding about genders in general. And the other thing, what was the other thing? Oh, Genders and Sexual Alliance is a new student group. Actually, it's an old student, it's a former student group. Joe Bowman is one of the advisors right here. And we are organizing that group again for this fall. We've had several students come to us, so if you're interested in that, please come to talk to me, Martha Campen, or Chris Cross, who has a very easy name to remember. And we're trying to organize that student club again, okay? Thanks, guys.
And thank you to everyone on the panel and all of you for coming. This was a profound experience. Thank you very much.